Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com, here with the 12 greatest contrapuntists of all time. Yes, isn't this intimidating? Counterpoint, as you know, is the art of polyphony. Polyphony, as you know, is the art of combining melodies, simultaneous musical lines. Now, there are all kinds of rules about this. It's considered very learned and a very forbidding topic. And so I want to say right away that my perspective on this, as someone who is not a musical scholar or a contrapuntist, is from that of the listener. From a listener's point of view. Some of you have pointed out the excellent ongoing articles by the conductor Kenneth Woods about who the greatest orchestrators are and all that. And I've read those, and they're very enjoyable, by the way. He's a fun guy to read. And he approaches these topics, at least of orchestration, from a conductor's point of view, from the performer's point of view. I do it from the listener's point of view. So there are many different ways that we can evaluate these things. And I'm certainly not doing this from a scholarly sense. I'm doing this from what I hear and what I know based on listening. So here are the 12 greatest contrapuntists of all time from the listener's standpoint. Number 1, Johannes Ockeghem. Ockeghem. Have you ever heard of Ockeghem? No, you haven't. Well, Ockeghem was one of those Renaissance guys. He lived in like the 1500s or something like that, one of the Flemish school. And he is absolutely famous for writing the greatest a cappella contrapuntal masterpiece mass setting, the Missa Prolationem. It has every single prolation, it's called, or something like that, of the melodic line going upside down and right side up and backwards and forwards and sideways and crazy. And it all sounds perfectly natural. It's amazing stuff. He was very highly regarded. His output is not large, and I'm using him as kind of a stand-in for that entire crew of composers because they're a wonderful group. I mean, you've got Lassus and Josquin and Machaut and everybody from the 1400s on up, and all the British guys, Bird and Tallis and Shepard, and there's tons and tons and tons and tons of that stuff, tons of it. And Ockeghem represents them all as far as I'm concerned. You can go and try any of them, and they could obviously be on the list. Now, some of them probably were not as great as others at counterpoint, but it all sounds like really good counterpoint to me. So I'm not in a position to evaluate them one at a time, especially when you read about them, everyone says, whoa, they were fantastically phenomenal. And music in those days was counterpoint. So, it was an era of contrapuntal genius. The other one from that period, the end of that period actually, is Palestrina, from the end of the 1500s. Palestrina you sort of have to pick because he was the iconic composer historically for a cappella choral contrapuntist. I mean, he was the guy. He wrote hundreds of masses, a zillion of them, and his music always has this perfectly flowing, sort of cool beauty to it. That's really, really quite extraordinary. Victoria was also, a contemporary of Palestrina. You could have picked him. I mean, it's similar, but Palestrina deserves credit and mention because, if only for historical reasons. Another composer who's not on the list, but who wrote the ultimate counterpoint treatise was Fuchs, the Viennese composer. He wrote the treatise Gradus ad Parnassum. Haydn learned counterpoint from studying that by himself. The funny thing about Fuchs as a composer is his music's actually rather charming. It's sort of, early Rococo, maybe a little bit more than that, but it's not forbiddingly learned in any sense of the term. It's really kind of nice. Anyway, I had to mention him, but he's not on the list. So Ockeghem, Palestrina, Handel. We've got to do Handel. Oh my gosh, of course. How could we do Handel without all of his fabulous choruses? I mean, he was the great master of choral writing, and he once remarked of Gluck that he doesn't know any more of counterpoint than my cook, Welz, who was Handel's cook, who actually wrote also scribe, copyist. When he wasn't cooking, he was doing Handelian things musically, and Handel's counterpoint is very, very free. You know from the Hallelujah Chorus that it has fugal episodes. You never know when he was going to break into counterpoint and break off counterpoint. He didn't really follow the rules like a lot of other composers did, but he sort of he understood it as a texture, a fabric that he could use at will. And it was just, it's wonderful. I mean, Handel's, what do I need to say about Handel? Zelenka. Now, there's a guy you may not know terribly well. Zelenka wrote really interesting fugues and contrapuntal episodes, often with very syncopated subjects or catchy, almost folksy sounding subjects. And he was highly respected by none other than J.S. Bach, who thought his contrapuntal writing was amazing. And if Bach thought it was amazing, then, well, who are we to argue? He wrote a bunch of masses, like 20 some odd of them, and other works. And whenever he was doing contrapuntal stuff, it was, again, like Handel's actually, free and rich and ebullient and just a joy to listen to, really. Not learned. It didn't sound sterile or academic. A great contrapuntist never sounds sterile. A great contrapuntist sounds like a great architect, someone who's able to build beautiful buildings in sound. And Zelenka was definitely one of those. Haydn, that may surprise you. Haydn was a phenomenal contrapuntist. H.C. Robbins Landon, the great Haydn scholar, called Haydn the last of the great contrapuntists, meaning the ones for whom writing counterpoint was as natural as breathing. They just knew how to do it. And they did it phenomenally. I mean, Haydn did it phenomenally in all of his choral works. He did it amazingly in his oratorios, in the great choruses in his oratorios, but also in his symphonies, in the string quartets, Opus 20, with their fugal finales, and some of the later ones. Haydn was able to use counterpoint either strictly in terms of fugue or contrapuntal forms, but he also could just do it, could just combine things. We tend not to talk about what we call functional counterpoint, where you put, just melodies together or things like that. It doesn't have to be an actual edifice. It can just be a way to enrich texture or to say two things simultaneously. Haydn was unbelievably good at that. Amazing at that. Next, Beethoven. Now, Beethoven is interesting. Beethoven is interesting because Beethoven's counterpoint is strenuous. Beethoven's counterpoint is a battle. Everything Beethoven wrote was a battle. I mean, we struggle is part of Beethoven's, his calling card is that of striving and struggle and ceaseless energy and whatnot. But Beethoven's fugues, whether they're orchestral, and some of them are, or in his quartets, or the grosse fuga, God forbid, or choral, as in the Missa Solemnis, they are all effortful. And that was the point. He really saw counterpoint as rhetoric, as an argument, compared to sonata music, which was drama. And a lot of Beethoven's life's project, particularly in his last period, was synthesizing and opposing the sonata form dramatic approach to writing music, a narrative where things happen, to a rhetorical style where they're argued over and discussed and chewed over and beaten up. And so Beethoven's counterpoint is very, very special, very, very special and different from everybody else's, but no less masterful. Also an amazing contrapuntist was Brahms. Brahms, of course, people don't realize Brahms spent his life when he was actually working for a living as opposed to being a composer, conducting choirs and editing Renaissance music. And I mean, he knew more about more music than probably anyone alive in his day. And he understood how to write absolutely gorgeous counterpoint and how to use contrapuntal devices like inversions. I mean, the third movement of the First Symphony. Ya da 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 da. Then he turns it upside down. Da 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 da. Like that. I can't do it, but he does it. That's the point. And that's a contrapuntal device, inverting a thing, playing something once, and then combining it with something else upside down or backwards or something. Brahms did all of that stuff. The Passacaglia at the end of the Fourth Symphony is a contrapuntal form. You have a repeated bass line with a series of variations moving over it. It's an extraordinary work. Brahms, and he used it more than once, by the way. The end of the Haydn variations is also a Passacaglia. Brahms used counterpoint effortlessly also. His orchestration may have been a little grotty periodically, but his counterpoint was absolutely infallible, absolutely amazing. Mahler. Yes, Mahler. Mahler was an amazing, of course, he wrote fugues, amazing fugues, the Rondo Burlesca, the Ninth, and the development section of the Eighth, and all kinds of other places. He did do strict contrapuntal forms, but most of the time, his counterpoint was just a function of his incredibly clear and detailed orchestral textures. He liked to have more than one thing going on at the same time, and he wanted you to hear it. So it went hand in hand with his unbelievable orchestration to create this rich, saturated, clean and clear contrapuntal fabric. Mahler himself was famous for saying, "There is no harmony, only counterpoint." He studied Bach like crazy. He was a major, major contrapuntal composer, and he only got more so as he got older. You know, the Ninth Symphony is extremely amazing in the simultaneous combination of melodies. Bartók. Bartók was a phenomenal contrapuntist. Oh my goodness. You know, he particularly liked fugues or fugal textures. Think of the chase scene in The Miraculous Mandarin, which is a fugato, actually. It's not a formal fugue, but things chase each other. And of course, in his string quartets, perhaps the most wonderful example of counterpoint in his string quartets is the beginning, the first, it's the sixth quartet, the whole thing, because it opens with a unison tune that he marks sadly, and then there's a movement, and then it comes back in two parts, and then there's a movement, then it comes back in three parts, and then the final movement is a four-part texture in beautiful counterpoint. I mean, Bartók was great. The finale of the Concerto for Orchestra is a fugue. The opening of the Music for Strings, Percussion, and Celesta is a fugue. He was a real contrapuntist, and of a modern sort. You know, he wasn't following the same rules of harmony, which made his counterpoint all the more wonderful because it could be extremely chromatic and gnarly, but nonetheless incredibly clear, or it could just be fun and vibrant and enjoyable. It was just great stuff. Shostakovich was another contrapuntist, and not just because he wrote the 24 preludes and fugues for piano. There are a lot of contrapuntal devices in his works. There are a lot of fugues and fugatos. The development section, for example, the Fifth Symphony has one. The fugue from Hell in the first movement of the Fourth Symphony, and also in the Scherzo, which is big fugue or instrumental fugue. He also liked to use other Baroque forms, such as the Passacaglia. The slow movement of the Violin Concerto is one. The fourth movement of the Eighth Symphony is another. The finale of the 15th Symphony. I mean, Shostakovich was a very natural contrapuntist. And he doesn't get a lot of credit for that either, because his music is so emotionally gut-wrenching. You don't really think about the counterpoint, which is as it should be. You should never have to think about it. You should only enjoy it and let it wash over you. Next, Alan Hovhaness, number 11. Hovhaness, the guy loved fugues. He wrote double fugues and triple fugues and quadruple fugues and all kinds of contrapuntal things in his symphonies. Beautifully worked out, lovely, lovely works. And they were all very harmonious and gorgeous sounding. And of course, Hovhaness gets no credit for that either, because everybody thinks he wrote, 107 of the same symphonies. That was Haydn who wrote 107 symphonies. Now, Hovhaness wrote like 68 or 80 something symphonies. And everything he wrote isn't of equal merit, probably. I haven't heard everything he wrote. I don't think anybody has. But his contrapuntal movements are some of his most successful because a lot of his music is very simple, sort of exotic, quasi-Asian thematic material over rich accompaniments and small orchestras as often as not huge, big, glitzy orchestras. So when he started writing, his fugues and counterpoint, they become climaxes, high points of the works in question because they're the most complex. Hello. Hi, Finster. Finster's coming to pay a visit, but I don't want her to stomp on this because it will... Come here. There we go. Thank you. Sit. Have a seat. Good girl. Okay. Now we can get this done maybe while she's over here. Right? You going to let us finish this? Yes. Will you? Yeah. You want to gnaw on my hand? She likes to chew. Okay. Last but not least, after Hovhaness, it's got to be J.S. Bach. I saved him for last because I just thought some of you would be going nuts thinking, why isn't he there? And you're going to say, oh, Hurwitz hates Bach. And I'm, nonsense. Bach is the guy. He's the guy. The Art of Fugue. He did it. That's it. There's nothing else to say. Everything he did was about counterpoint. His life was counterpoint. I mean, he was the greatest contrapuntist to ever punt the contra. So there, I said it. I hope that proves. I don't have to go any further with that. That's the list, folks. If you've got some other contrapuntists you want to make the case for, feel free to chime in. Right? Wasn't that fun? Yes, thank you. And keep on listening, friends. Thanks for joining me. Take care.